Good morning, Facebook Live, day 23 Hormone Bootcamp. So I'm going to stop by and I'm going to show you actually these probiotics I made uh, last night. So you can see they've been sitting out all day. So let me see if I can get closer so you can see. Look at the little bubbles on top. See if you can see any actually actively moving. I don't know if the camera will catch those, but yeah, so there you go. You can kind of see it there, right? Anyways, so the reason why I'm showing you this, okay, is because this is what active probiotics look like. And I'm going to share with you a very powerful concept when it comes to fasting. So this week, we are starting to get into understanding fasting and understanding probiotics. I have a link in the description of this live video on a video that I did on fasting. So I highly recommend that you watch that multiple times, study, take notes. Even this video, I'm going to be sharing a lot of information this week. I want to really give you as much as I can. Over the last couple of days, I've basically been sharing more on things to expect from this week and a couple like warnings, and today's kind of like a little bit of that, but also I want to help you transition into more of like the positive side, like the real reason why I study fasting and practice fasting, and why it's one of the main tools that I'm using on my journey to healing my leaky gut, my gut issues. And so here we go. You're going to hear a lot of people that, number one, when you tell them that you are fasting, this is like a small percentage of the world population, I believe, that not only actually applies the knowledge of fasting, but that even thinks that fasting is good for you. You're going to hear a lot of people, especially professionals and doctors. I've heard so many of them say that fasting isn't good for you. A lot of just normal day-to-day people, whenever I tell people that I'm fasting, I'm telling you, like, most of the time, the reaction you're going to get from it is not necessarily a positive one. Now, to ignore people that don't know anything about health is easy. But when you have doctors telling you that fasting isn't good for you, that makes you question fasting a little bit. And so I want to try to give you like my best way of how I look at fasting and why I think that fasting is the best thing that could have implemented into my health, into my health routine. So here's basically why a lot of people or a lot of professionals think that fasting isn't good for you, and I think that it's a confusion. It's really a confusion because fasting, one of the benefits of fasting comes from a process that's called autophagy. Now, that's a big word that kind of what it means, basically, the translation from the Greek, I think, is where it comes from. It's basically the body eating itself. So when you hear that, it doesn't sound very good, right? It sounds like, whoa, my body's eating itself. There's labels like starvation mode, or, some people may even call fasting like, oh, you're starving yourself. That's not what's going on. Okay. So let me see if I can bridge the gap and really help you understand what you're trying to avoid, and hopefully help you understand like what really what you are looking for. So what you're trying to avoid is basically what happened to me when I was basically having a hard time digesting protein. So having a hard time digesting protein, what the body does in that case is that your adrenals release cortisol, and they begin to release cortisol so that they can break down muscle so that it can get the amino acids that it needs, right? So that is, in a way, technically like the body eating itself, but that is not what autophagy is, right? That's not what we're looking for out of fasting. But that's the confusion. That's what a lot of people think is going on. When you're fasting, it's like, oh, the body's eating itself. No, that's not what's going on. So the only reason why I understand this is because in brewing beer, there is the fermentation phases. There's the phase where the yeast basically begin to grow and populate. This is where they begin to colonize. There's the attenuation phase. That's basically when they eat up all of the sugar and convert it into alcohol. And then there's the conditioning phase. The conditioning phase is basically when the yeast go and clean up. They basically eat themselves in a way, and they clean up all of the junk, right? And this is why, if you drink like, wine or any higher alcohol beverage, basically, you may hear the term that aging, the older, the more you age it, the better it gets. That's because it goes through a cleanup process. So essentially what fasting does for you is that it does a cleanup process, right? I don't think of it as the body eating itself. I think of it as the body cleaning itself up. And what it's cleaning up, it's old damaged cells. And the best way that I can explain it is when I look back at what happened to my health. I was 28 years old and I literally felt like I aged so fast that, basically what I envisioned at that point, the reason why I was so fatigued, why I was going through all of these health issues, what I envisioned was basically all of these cells in my body just basically aged and they were broken. Autophagy, what happens when you do fasting is essentially the body going in and repairing. It's eating up all those old cells so that it can create new ones, right? So it's not just like eating itself and, quote unquote, killing itself. It's really not so much eating itself, but I think of it as like breaking itself down so that it can rebuild itself, rebuild new cells, right? And that is the difference, right? You're not basically eating up your own body or breaking down your own body because you're starving or not getting nutrients. No, you're doing it because it's part of the cleanup process. It's part of the maintenance process. It's very different than the adrenals releasing cortisol to break down muscle to get amino acids because you can't digest food properly. That's not good. Fasting is not that, right? Fasting to me is basically part of our cleanup process. It's one of the reasons why, ever since I understood this, I decided that I was going to do intermittent fasting every single day because I just realized that that's just part of my health maintenance plan. So, when it comes to probiotics, the main thing that you want to get into is basically the habit of taking your probiotics every day. And the way that you want to think of probiotics, to start out, the best habit is really at night. Because, probiotics, basically what they do is they digest food for you. And really what we're trying to do this week for Hormone Bootcamp is improve our digestion. That's basically what I realized I needed to do, because I can feed my body the nutrients that it needs to produce hormones and get all these other nutrients. But if the body cannot digest it properly, then all of that food does you no good, right? That's why, like, when it comes to like supplements and things like that I recommend, I tell people, it's like, if you don't get the stuff that I recommend, chances are that your body's not going to be able to digest it or break it down or use it up, because I understand that, part of the main reason why we're all here is because we all have digestive issues. Many of us have yeast overgrowth, or maybe viral infections or parasites or whatever it is that's causing all these digestive issues. And because I understand what that digestive process is like, that's why I put together this little process for myself. And this is just my own blueprint that I'm sharing with everyone. I'm starting to get people that have different conditions going on, and I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing my journey. I'm not a doctor, I'm a home brewer. I keep saying that. But anyways, if you start to get into the habit of just drinking probiotics, at least, towards the evening, then that's going to help you break down all of the food that you've eaten throughout the day. Later on, if you want to, probiotics, really, there's no wrong time to take them. You can take them in the morning, you can take them in the middle of the afternoon, you can take them in the evening. It really doesn't, there's just different uses, I guess. Like, if I were to drink this in the morning, what I think this would do to me is basically go into my gut and clean up, right? If I haven't, I haven't had food since, 6, 7 p.m. last night, um, you know, I will drink like a lot of water, and if I keep drinking the probiotics throughout the day, my stomach is empty. So now that gives these probiotics that are just, they've already eaten, they've already fermented. Now they're going to be entering that cleanup phase, the autophagy phase, right? So I can do that. And so I know that some people, they hear like, okay, fasting is good for you, but fasting is like working out, right? You can only work out for so much. You can only put so much effort, but you need to replace that or counterbalance that with a rest period. And that's where a lot of people go wrong. I've had some people already, the experience is like, oh, fasting is going to be the best thing for me. And they go fasting and then they experience all the detox effects. Well, this is the opposite. This is like the resting phase of it. If you were to, like, if you want to get aggressive on anything this week, make that on probiotics. Make it on probiotics. Go back to the diet plan that I shared and notice how right around, the intermediate phase, I introduced traditional cooking. Traditional cooking is basically adding more probiotics into every single food that you eat, right? If there's anything you want to be aggressive on, is in basically growing more probiotics in your gut. I don't remember how many days ago, maybe 3-4 days ago, there's a video I was talking about the difference between conventional farming and regenerative farming, which was basically conventional farmers. They go look at the field and they basically ask themselves, okay, what do I have to kill today? What kind of weeds, what kind of pesticides, herbicides do I have to use to, kill stuff from the soil? When it comes to detoxing, that's the biggest mistake I see people make is they go into their gut and see, oh, what's the bad bacteria? What's the bad yeast that I have to kill? You don't want to kill anything in your gut. That's going to cause bigger issues. You want to think like a regenerative farmer, thinking, okay, what am I going to be growing in my gut today? Right. That's why like the probiotic strains that I look for are probiotic strains that I know help reduce yeast candida. I'm not trying to kill yeast candida. I'm trying to grow the probiotics that eat yeast candida. Right. That's a big difference that I hope you guys, understand. And I am seeing your comments, but I'm driving, so I'll read them as soon as I get a chance. Um, but, pay attention to this because I think this is really important. Okay, fasting is it's an art, right? There's no one way to do it. There's a lot of different concepts within it that the more you learn about it, the better you're going to be at using it and understanding it. And I think that this phase right here, I can only teach you so much, but really it's kind of like learning music, right? I can only teach you like the basics, but you're going to be the one that's going to practice this. And, it's kind of like practicing scales on guitar or piano. And then once you become a master of these fundamentals, you are going to go out and create like your own music. You're going to use it however it fits your lifestyle, right? That's the one thing that you're going to, have to like take on yourself, because you're going to experience basically what I'm experiencing. You're essentially catching up to me to where I am. I can fast, right? And I'm basically reaching my peaks. Like, okay, I can only fast. Like I've done a 7-day water fast, right? I want to do a 2-week water fast, but I need to prepare for it. This is what I do to prepare for my fasting. I increase my probiotics, I detox myself, and basically every day I do intermittent fasting because it's practice for me to be fasting. So anyways, let me try to see. Isn't making hormones anti-aging? Yes. What you did was reverse what happened to your body. You had to stop, reboot, and restart. Essentially, kind of. Does drinking kombucha count as taking probiotics? It contains some sugar though. Okay, great question. So the way that I think of it is, the cells can only um they can only clone themselves. So like if you have damaged cells, you're going to clone damaged cells. And so if you are essentially already, aged, then that's what you're going to be cloning. And so essentially what the way that I think of what I did with all the fasting and everything else was that I essentially shedded out anything that was aged, and whatever was left over that was still, young and healthy, that's what I focused on regrowing. But obviously, even those cells have already been aged, right? I was 28 years old when a lot of this happened. I used to feel and look like I was about 35 years old. I just turned 36, a few days ago, and I get a lot of people that tell me that I look way younger than I look. And not only that, I mean, I feel much better than I did in my 20s. And so from here on out, I just know that all of these things that I'm doing, I don't think of him as like anti-aging or anti or like reverse aging necessarily, but it's almost like slowing down the aging process. So it's the opposite of what happened to me when I felt like my body just aged so fast, because of all the toxicity, all of these cells basically breaking down. I essentially stopped that process, and no, I'm still going to be aging, but it's just going to be at a much slower pace. And that's why for me intermittent fasting is like a habit that I've cultivated, that it's just like hydrating first thing in the morning. Intermittent fasting is just part of my lifestyle. Like, I just feel so good, and I just hope that people understand all of this. And all you can do is really implement it and just see what your experience is like with it. um but yeah, so and then kombucha, does it count as taking probiotics? Yes. And so here's the thing with kombucha is basically probiotics, and it's a balanced type of probiotics. It's made with a SCOBY, SCOBY, stands for symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, right? Those are probiotics. Does it contain some sugar? No. When you understand fermentation, you understand fermentation is nothing more than bacteria, whether it's probiotics or yeast. When they eat sugar, that's fermentation. So you make kombucha by adding sugar to it, because that's what bacteria and yeast eat. But just like these probiotics, all of these bubbles that are being formed, here at the top, that's basically the bacteria eating up all the sugar. So when you let it ferment, you're basically letting the bacteria and the yeast eat up all the sugar. And in that process, they're making nutrients, right? So when you're actually drinking it, if you drink it before it ferments, you are drinking sugar. But if you wait until after it ferments, then you're no longer drinking sugar, because it's already been eaten. That's all fermentation is. When you go study like traditional cooking methods, that's all that is. Sourdough bread, you basically let sourdough with a yeast starter, and then the yeast basically go in and eat up all of the sugar and basically pre-digest the dough. And that's why sourdough bread is much, much easier to digest than regular bread, right? These are all of the same concepts. This is why a lot of this basically makes sense. I mean, fermentation really, like if you think about it, you start from a seed, and then that seed begins to break down, and then you got a tree that sprouts, that basically gives you fruit. The fruit at first is not ripe, but it begins to digest, and then it becomes ripe. Now it's easy to digest, and then you go from that into being rotten, or if it's actually going through good fermentation, it'll turn into some sort of wine, right? So that's basically it. It's the same exact process. So anyways, I gotta get going, but I hope you guys enjoyed today's lesson, and I will talk